It's going to be about change, personal change, professional change, the change that's happening across the country, locally, globally. Things seem to be changing at a rapid pace more than ever. But from a personal perspective, my wife and I recently became empty nesters. It's like a metamorphosis for you as a person. You go from being, number one, a parent and having all of your life revolve around your children for 18 to 20 something years. And all of a sudden one day your house is empty, their kids aren't there anymore. We had our children quite young. And so we had our kids when we were 24 years old. We had 3 sons before we were 29. And so we really grew into adulthood being parents. And that was something that her and I talked about a lot in the last year, is what that's like to now kind of, we don't have our kids around us. That was one of our identifiers of who we are. What does that mean for who we are without them as we continue to grow and discover more things about each other and ourselves internally? So change is a big thing. The way I look at things is a lot different. It's evolved a lot. How I prioritize and spend my time has changed significantly. I probably spent a vast majority of my time coaching baseball for a few years when my sons were playing baseball in there, from 7 years old to 14 years old. As much as work and clients were a priority, my kids were always first. My family was always first. You got to make a buck, you got to make a living. But anybody who's ever known me or sat down to have lunch or coffee with me has heard me say that before. And so the change in perspective about priorities in your life was a big one that 2025 and to some extent 2024 as well was a focus for us. I won't say a focus, it was more of a realization. I think we knew the change was going to happen. We're very aware of that, but what it meant and what it led to and how we're going to go through it, you could never predict that, right? So the reason I bring that up when we talk about business and about the company is that the company's me. My clients get me. I'm the leader of the company. I set the tone. I don't think the value set or our goals for stewardship or integrity, leadership, transparency, none of that's changed, but I look at it through probably a more mature and changed lens than I did before because of what's happening in my life personally right now. So, I talk about our personal change. I started in saying, hey, that, the world, the country, these things are going through change. The company's going through change. I think you see a lot happening on the news. I'm not going to talk about just everything that's going on the news from a global or US perspective, but I mean on the LinkedIn news, when you're looking at what people are posting, there's a lot of change happening in the real estate market and construction and design. What's happening with investing? What's happening with cap rates, with markets, with demand? There's a big change going, and there's a lot of stagnation, but that stagnation is in itself change. People have to respond to a lack of capital flowing into the market. That in and of itself is a change. You have a changing labor pool. Baby boomers are aging out. You have a change in technology. You have a change in the way people are compensated. You have a change in risk profile. You have a change in priorities. These are all things that business owners and managers and leaders are going to have to work through, that they're going to have to manage. So they have to find a way to still be able to make and build successful companies, provide for their clients, whether they're a service-based industry or a product-based industry, and provide for the people that work for them and help them grow. I think the other part of change that you're seeing right now is I think we're having a shift back into the office. We've had 5 years now of remote work being the preferred way that people wanted to work. And I remember saying very early on that I didn't like that concept for a couple of reasons, but primarily because of mentorship. And so when we talk about what I just said about baby boomers aging out, I'm a Gen X. Gen X is moving up higher into leadership roles. We're getting into our 50s, and Gen Z coming in. Mentorship is a big deal. There's a lot of change happening in the workplace. Having someone that has been through what you're going through, if you're a younger worker, someone you can talk to, you can just dip into their office and say, hey, I called this person and they're not getting back to me, or, this contractor is saying this, I don't know how to handle that. Or even if it was just, what did you think of the World Series or the Broncos game yesterday or whatever it is, those things help people understand how to maneuver relationships in the professional environment. I remember watching a lot of the folks that I look up to in the industry in not even like direct lessons, but just watching the way that they spoke to people, watching the questions they asked, how they treated people. That helped shape what I try to do in the workplace with either the folks that work with me or the people that are on my project teams. And I think the last 5 years there's been a gap in that. And so I think we're seeing a change back. I think people are realizing, hey, there is serendipity that can happen in the office space, things that I didn't expect to happen. There's an opportunity for mentorship. There is the ability to have someone to talk to. You've probably heard the term third spaces, right? We have home, we have work, and there's a third place could be the bar, it could be your church, it could be a community space, the gym. Third places are starting to go away. Well, when we removed work from that as well, people only had one place. I almost liken it to what we think about the bartender, right? Somebody's having a tough day and they go into the bar, and the bartender is a person that you could just bend their ear. You could just be like, man, it's a rough one today, and here's why, right? Coworkers are like that. They're like pockets of unpaid for therapy. And they're going in with a shared experience that you have, right? They know what deadlines you have. They know the bosses and the managers and the clients and the contractors and the suppliers. It's a shared environment that you can relate to. And again, it doesn't have to be something that we're sharing everything with them, but it's just something nice to have that you don't otherwise get. So, having that second place, much less trying to get that third place, I think is important for all of our mental health and emotional health. And I'm happy to see that change happening in society. The other thing that I'm seeing would change is I talked about the young workforce. My middle son is entering the construction industry, right? And so that's been very interesting from a perspective of change, where we used to talk about baseball, and then we talked about school and exams, and we talked about girls he was interested in, and maybe what are we going to do for spring break. Now, he called me up the other day and said, at the job site, we're having this problem. I'm not really confident in the way this project's being managed. And he's still in college. He's an intern. And I'm like, well, tell me what you're seeing. Why you say that? Because remember, you don't see the whole picture. You're still an intern. He actually just moved into a full-time position with the company. So, well, I'm having to coordinate all these things between the trades, and there's just no schedule. Kind of like, it feels like we're being very reactive. I said, well, who's in charge of the schedule? Oh, my project manager built the schedule. Okay, well, do you know what he built it on? Do you know what was communicated to the subs? There's going to be a contract tied to a schedule from the general contractor, and he works for a general contractor, to the various trades and the subcontractors. So people that you're working with in the field, each of those tradesmen has a contract that they're beholden to, and there's a schedule within that. And some of them say this and this and this. And so have you ever thought to ask your project manager if you can see those contracts, if you can see those schedules? And she's like, no, I haven't thought about that. So, well, you should do that. And what else? Tell me what else is going on. I said, well, there's a lack of communication. We say we're going to do one thing one day. It's Tuesday, and we say by Wednesday we're going to have this done, and Wednesday comes and we don't have it done. And then I'm the one who has to clean it up with all the subs. I said, well, who's not doing the work on Tuesday to prepare for Wednesday? He's like, we're not doing it. Lack of communication, lack of planning. I said, you're observing problems that are universal in not only construction, but a lot of industries. The fact that you're able to observe these, basically your first job is kudos to you. And here's, a proud dad moment. I was very, very proud of him for recognizing these things. And he said, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, I don't know. That's why I'm calling you, Dad. I said, okay, ask the questions. You're not going to show up into your superintendent's office in the trailer. You're not going to show up into your project manager's office and tell them that they're not doing a good job. That is not going to win any friends, and it's certainly not going to help the situation. But go in and ask them questions. Can I see the schedule? Hey, you said that we were going to do this. Why did you say that we should do it this way? Because when I look at the schedule, I didn't see that. Or we said we were going to do this thing, but when we actually had our sub meeting with all the tradesmen, a couple hours later, we didn't mention that at all. And in fact, what we told them was contradictory to what we said we were going to do in this other meeting. Why? Like, can you help me understand? Am I missing something? Is it okay if you guys share with me these contracts? Can I see the schedules that you've sent with everybody? Can I see the schedule that we update? And as you start to ask those questions, if you ask them in the right way, from a respectful standpoint, and a point of genuine curiosity, you're not trying to ask a question to set somebody up to get them in a gotcha moment. You're asking the question because you're curious and you want to know. If you ask the question from that standpoint, you're going to get people who respond with answers that are very helpful. They're going to want to help you. They're going to respect your curiosity. They're going to be inspired and excited about it. People want the opportunity to teach the next generation. They want the opportunity to explain what an expert they are, the things they know, to show that they know something and pass that on. So if you can ask the question in that way, you're going to get a positive response and you're going to know more. And as you're talking through these things, you're going to be able to say, here's what I'm observing. I'm observing that we're falling down and creating a problem here, here, and here. And because you asked in a respectful way and you know more, you're going to be able to work together as a team to solve those things. And what was really so funny as I'm talking to my son, I'm just thinking to myself, I never thought I would have the opportunity to have this conversation with him. You know, this is kind of conversation I've had with some of the young folks that work with me. It's a conversation that I've had with leadership groups when I talk about my leadership style, and I'm talking to my peers. I talk about things like this, about, you know, being humble when you ask and being curious when you ask. So it was really interesting to have that conversation with my son, especially because those of us that are parents know that your children don't always think that you're very bright. They tend to think that they know everything and that you know nothing. But he actually approached me with a very, you know, hey, my dad's been doing this a long time. He knows this better than I do. And he learned a lot of stuff from my dad, my grandpa, before that I learned from his grandpa before he passed away, and he's now learning it from me. So anyway, a few weeks later, I said, hey, how'd it go? Did you talk to him? He's like, yeah, I did. You know, it wasn't as kind of the direct way that you had said, but it was more of like a in passing, hey, what about this? What about that? Can you teach me about this? And I think it opened their eyes to that there were some faults in the process, and it's gotten a lot better, and it's moving a lot smoother, and the relationships are being repaired that were being damaged with the subs. So that's interesting to see as I talk through like what happened in 2025. And, you know, I thought, as I said, my theme for the last year was change. And maybe the better word is evolution. You know, the evolution of where I am personally, where I am as a father and a husband, where the company is, where now my son is going to, is just this evolution. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen for in 2026 for Beecher Development Services. But 20 months ago, I was very much able to say we hadn't ever gotten one job off of an RFP. Every single project we've gotten was by word of mouth, and we don't have one single government job. Every single job that we have is private. First statement is still true. 100% of the projects we have is word of mouth. That hasn't changed. Still haven't won an RFP, although we've got a couple out there I'm feeling pretty confident about. But now, out of all the projects we have running, which is probably 8 or 9, I think, only one of them is a private commercial client. All the rest are government projects. And as the company evolves, what we're starting to see and what I'm planning are diving further into the government realm, specifically GSA and VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs. If you've been paying attention to our LinkedIn video series that's on the Beecher Development LinkedIn page, you see our chats with Brian Redmond and Chad Becker over at Arco Real Estate Solutions, and we're talking about the GSA projects we've worked on. I think we're going to continue to dive in a little deeper. I will also say one of the things that I'm looking forward to in 2026 and beyond is Beecher Development Services is diving a little bit more into the developer role with some partnerships where we're strategically positioning ourselves to contribute as a general partner in GSA and VA developments with other strategic partners in the industry. That's kind of the next evolution for our company. We certainly are not going to be turning our backs on our private clients by any means. There's opportunity there. We're looking at some stuff in the industrial and warehouse and R&D space. We still working on our commercial tenant finish stuff, but we respond to the market. Multifamily isn't doing so great right now, so we're not doing a lot of multifamily stuff. Hospitality is not doing so great right now, so we're not doing a lot of hospitality stuff. We do still have office stuff going. We've got some restaurant and retail stuff going, but I'd say the vast majority of what we're working on right now is government work, federal government work, and we hope to continue growing that side. And the other thing I don't know that people know is the big change is we're doing work all over the country. For 15 or 16 years, all our projects have been in Colorado, primarily, I would say, within an hour and a half of Denver. And we currently have projects in Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, Utah, Washington, and California. I think that's all the states. I don't think I'm missing any there. We're currently looking at one in Wyoming and a couple more in California. So looking to keep growing, expanding, and working in different markets. And again, evolution or change, I think, is the key word for 2025. So I was talking earlier about observing my mentors in the industry, and one of them is a name that a lot of folks around Denver will know is Brad Buchanan. Brad was the principal at Buchanan Januszewski Group. I was a young architect there. Brad has been the CEO of the National Western Complex, and now is, I think, the director of planning for the city of Denver. Once again, super respected individual in our community in Denver and in our industry. And I remember Brad one time saying he never wanted anyone that worked with him for him. He never wanted to hear the words, "That's not my job." And I think as a younger person in the industry, and this is a conversation I've had a lot, had this conversation with Martin Goldstein at Venture Architecture recently. We tend to get into lanes. We become specialists, right? In the industry, you might be a specification writer, and that's your specialty. You might be an interior designer, and that's your specialty. You might be on the job site responsible for site layout, and that's your specialty. And it becomes, that's what you do, and that's what you're good at. And I love that. I love to be passionate about that. But what I think of when I hear someone say that's not my job, I hope what I'm not hearing is that I'm a selfish person and I'm not going to go above and beyond. I hope what I'm hearing, because I think it can be fixed, is I'm not curious. I'm not curious to know what else is going on. And so I think about the people that I like to work with, and I think about what my clients would expect from me. After the last few years, one word that has bubbled up in talking to clients and talking to contractors, when just talking about our company, is the word stewardship. I really see Beecher Development as a steward for our clients and their projects, and a steward for our project teams. In order for me to be the best steward that I can't ever think that something's not my job. I might not be the best person to do the job, and it might not, whatever the client's asking for, and I might not have been specifically written down in the contract that I have with them. In fact, it might have been excluded, or just it's something that we forgot to talk about. But because I'm a curious person and I want to know everything about the project, if the client asks me to do something, I'm going to at least look into it. I might not be capable of doing it, but if I look into it and start asking questions and find out who the experts are, and I start doing research, then I can at least tell the client, hey, I'm not the right person to solve this for you, but I know somebody who is. I commented on this a few times in the last few months. I just had this wave line up right now where I have been reading an obscene amount of purchase and sale agreements, leases, helping clients with different negotiations. And I'm not an attorney. I'm not a real estate attorney. I'm not a broker. But when the client says, hey, can you read through this purchase and sale agreement for me and tell me what you think? I'm going to do it. I'm going to look at it. But what I end up finding is like, man, there's so much in here that just, it doesn't make sense. Either it doesn't apply to your project, or it's putting you in a situation that carries too much risk once we start the project. I feel like a lot of these contracts and leases are written so much about the financial aspects of When do you pay rent? How do you adjust rent? What's the penalty if you don't pay? How is it paid? How can you get out of the lease or the purchase and sale agreement? Who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? But at the end of the day, all these things are written around a physical space that has to be engaged in, right? Whether you have a project or not, there's a physical space. And that physical space has people that are going to work on it to build it, or work in it for the company. And that, I think a lot of times that gets overlooked. Like, how are you doing your job? I had an oil and gas company that they asked me to read their tenant work letter. I was like, this is just ridiculous. This doesn't make any sense. You're not in control of the design. You're not in control of the construction. You're not in control of the purse strings of who pays for what, but you have to pay all the change orders. You have to pay all the overages. And if somehow there's savings, even though you don't get a say in what's spent or not, the savings go back to the landlord. How did not anybody see this? I had a GSA project recently where the government was trying to make all these changes. They were trying to write something to justify a change in the common area factor based on square footages that were changing in the floor plan based on what the government requested. And I said, how much does this cost you? What does the loss of rent by them increasing their common area factor, they wanted a corridor, by them adding this corridor, how much in rent does this cost you over the life of the lease? It costs this. Okay, and it's going to cost us about $130,000 to build this corridor. It costs this much money in lost rent. Why don't we just state that? Here is what your decision is costing us. That will set a baseline by which then we can negotiate to try and land on a number that makes sense to change the common area factor or to increase the rent by. When I talk about what I learned from mentors and talk about, that's not my job. It'd be really easy for me to say, well, it's not my job to look at the purchase and sale agreement and come up with a negotiation strategy. It's not my job to negotiate a lease amendment and a change with a GSA. You have brokers for that. At the end of the day, I've worked on something I didn't anticipate working on. I'm very grateful that I get the opportunity to learn these things. Instead of saying it's not my job, I like to take it on. And what usually comes out of it is, I think, oh, this is going to take me 30 minutes. And then 3 hours later, I'm still looking at the leases and trying to figure this stuff out. I'm emailing or texting the client and be like, well, what did your attorney say about this? And how much money do you have in reserves for that? And, what if we did it this way? And they'll say, well, we can't do it this way because we have this partnership with so-and-so. We're not allowed to use the money that way. And, well, okay, well, what if we try this? And what that does is it gives me juice. It makes me really do feel like I'm providing the best possible service for my clients, but it builds trust. It lets my clients know that I genuinely care. Like, I want this to be successful. I'm going to call all the experts, all the people I know. Hey, I've got this project. I've never worked on something like this before. I know you have. Here's what's going on. Can you help me through this? In fact, the project that was going on with the corridor, I called an architect that's not even working on the project, but he's my go-to guy when I have code questions. And he's done 1 million GSA projects. I'm able to take that back to the client and help them out. And by making that call, being able to make that call. And I'm fortunate enough to been around the industry in Denver for 24 years and built up a great network and great relationships. If you've ever sat down with me for coffee or lunch, you've heard me say, hey, one of my favorite things is the New Yorker in me comes out and say, I got a guy. Oh, you need this? I got a guy, right? And I'm very fortunate enough to have built that network and worked on projects with a lot of people that they respect what we do and they respect what I do and how I treat people, and they're happy to help. So I think that is, one of the main things that I learned early on in my career from Brad, and it was evolved back to the other word of the day, evolution, involved by watching other mentors that I've had throughout the years in the industry and see how they treat people and how they go out of their way. And those are I find the most successful people and the most successful businesses. We might not all be the best salespeople and be able to get the job in. And in fact, I'll tell you things that you don't want to hear. And a lot of times I'm sure that loses me some projects. At the end of the day, if I'm going to do what's right for you and make sure that we're all successful on the project instead of just getting something in, that's always the goal for us.